Hey Sean, here is the feedback for your pitch. Sorry, my glasses are steaming up because it's crazy hot and I turned all my fan off so there wasn't any background noise.
I begin?
1 second, please. Okay, take it away, sir.
Okay, so classmates on the screen, we image here from a group called Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. Now,
What if it was just a picture of a road? So people were like, what is this picture about? And what if you started with an Area 47 opening? So at first, before you explain everything you're going to talk about, you can start off like with that situation. Wouldn't that have compelled interest? And then after you do that, then you introduce yourself and say all these things.
of you may be familiar with this group, but if you're not, they advocate against drinking and driving. Now, if you look at the words on the screen here, they're pretty simple. Driving impaired is never worth the risk, and plan ahead for a sober ride home.
So you're not talking about MAD, right? You just brought it up as like a proxy for drinking and driving kind of thing, right? Also, we don't. It doesn't matter that this is what they say, right? So imagine one slide of just the road and then one slide with this thing. You didn't have to, but I'm just saying, could have saved you some time.
I believe that plan doesn't have to begin before you go out and begin your night. Let's imagine a scenario.
Okay, good. I like that you're using a belief statement. I believe plan ahead for a sober ride home. I believe that you do not have to plan ahead for a sober ride home. That would have been like, And look how I paused and slowed it down. This needs to be slow and paused irrespective of time because it's probably the one thing people are going to remember. Do you remember the 5% rule from Module 1? One thing you said in a general impression?
For a second. You work in the downtown core and it's a beautiful day. Your boss lets you go early and you've driven to work, but you go out for drinks with colleagues. What about an idea where you can pull out your phone to call an Uber, but instead of calling an Uber, you're paired with a sober driver? They get in your vehicle, they bring you home, they're licensed, they're back checked.
Okay, this is I love that you're using a scenario. But let's simplify it a little bit. So imagine you drove to work, but it's Friday and you had a couple of happy hour drinks. Sure, you can get home, but what about your car? Does that mean you got to drive all the way back to work on Saturday? Are you paying for more parking? What if there was a better way? What if you could call up a sober person who's just somewhere in the neighborhood, like you would call up an Uber, but instead of them coming with their car, they come and give you a ride home in your car? All the safety checks of Uber, but they just drive your car.
Now, a couple
For
businesses
example,
probably come to
slowed
mind
it
when you
down.
think about this, and I'm assuming that they're going to be Uber and Lyft. If you take a look at their business models, like I have, when creating
So you see how in my little explanation, how I totally destroyed this argument? You could reinforce it here. By the way, good visuals so far. I really like the visuals you're using so far. Very simple to understand. This is a great visual. Yeah, of course you think Uber and Lyft, but here's the thing. What about your car? You now have to pay downtown parking overnight as well? That little element of you drove at the beginning needs to be there to really, because that's what really hammers the idea home. In fact, you could have had a slide that said, "What about your car?"
comparable business, I wanted to find out
What if you started a presentation with a picture of your car? This is my car, and I love it. But I hate leaving it somewhere overnight that isn't my house. Especially if I've had a few drinks and I don't feel like I should be driving home. But what about my car? Imagine if that was the beginning.
where do these drivers struggle, and their biggest complaint, and I watched hours of YouTube videos to determine this, was cost on their vehicle and cost of gas. But if you're in somebody else's vehicle, you're not going to have to incur these costs. Taking a look at these two businesses comparably, you're looking at the cost per mile with tip being a little bit cheaper on Lyft's side, so Lyft being the better option for most people.
The thing is that none of this has anything to do with your business plan, but I do love that you're kind of breaking it down. When you explain this again, I think you should say, because you remember you're here. Think about what you're showing me. Title. By the way, this image is great. And you probably this is probably a pre-existing image. So what do? Draw my eye to things here.
These costs. Taking a look at these two businesses comparably.
As you're talking, here's what your audience is doing. They're like, which they're trying to figure out. You actually probably they're just going to stare. They might see 479, 432, 430, 332. They might do like that, but they're not actually processing any of that information. So you have to make these 4 images, each one into one image in my brain by telling me what to look at, and then tell me what to look at, and then tell me what to look at.
You're looking at the cost per mile with tip being a little bit cheaper on Lyft side. So Lyft being the better option for most people.
So if you look, can you only look at the top two numbers? That's with tip. The bottom two numbers are without tip. That's it. So then, oh, I understand. I understand.
In comparison in the stock market, we're also going to see Lyft leading the way. Now, for a second, imagine how sort of crazy this idea would be, but to know that it exists.
So, well, I'm literally trying to figure out. I just noticed right now that it's Uber and Lyft in the top left-hand corner. So you've assumed that we can understand this slide, but there's no relationship between what you just said and the slide in my head until after I realized that the dark blue is Uber and the light blue is Lyft. I need that amount of time. So why not just start this slide by saying the baby blue on top is Lyft, the bottom is Uber. Just look on the far right corner where it says 21.65 and 4.98. Then all the things you're saying.
Already just has not been technologically integrated in order to be more effective. It has not been technologically integrated to be more effective, has led to ignore services like this and ignore options like this, and unfortunately risk our lives while drinking and driving. If you take a look
like
at
this, obstacles like this, like what? Options like having someone just drive your car with you versus driving in someone else's car. It took me so long to figure out what the business model was when I was listening to this. That's only now starting to really click in my head after I've watched
businesses are doing. Although projections have not been great throughout their first year after launching their IPO initial public offering, there is a lot of market potential for future growth. In addition to this, my business will be pairing up with weddings, private events, large functions to provide both designated drivers and valet drivers to get people home.
I love it. I love this image. And because at first you're like, I'm like this, and valet drivers to make home. So that made a lot of sense to me. At first, I'm like trying to figure out what this image is about. And because it's one clean picture, I could process it very quickly. And I was listening to what you were saying.
An interesting statistic from StatScan would be that when reporting people who have driven after consuming alcohol, most people surveyed had driven twice after consuming more than one beverage. To grow my business,
this slide needs to be clarified a little bit more. And I think if you were going to practice this, you should show this to a few people, say what you're saying, because I'll be straight up with you. I was trying to read this, but I also wanted to hear, so I was half reading and half listening, and I wasn't 100% sure what this slide was about because there's so much on it here. So, proportion of drivers who reported having driven an on-road vehicle after consuming 2 drinks in the preceding hour by the number of times in the previous 12 months. So this is saying, and now I'm only going to listen to you. Hold on. Now I'm only going to listen to you.
Home. An interesting statistic from StatScan would be that when reporting people who have driven after consuming alcohol, most people surveyed had driven twice after consuming more than one beverage.
Okay. Stats Canada calculation. So look how long it's taking me to figure out what this, what you're saying and everything is. So that's why you have to be able to jump in on this. So instead of saying an interesting statistic would be to why not here transition with a rhetorical question. So how many people actually drink? So how many people actually drink and drive? What, in other words, what's our market? Well, here's the thing.
An
If
interesting statistic
so, and just using that to transition, do you see what I mean?
from
Here.
StatsCan.
So how many people actually do drink and drive? Well, if we look at it, almost 30% of people who drive have reported drinking, having more than 2 drinks, and then also driving home. Over 20% of people, of Canadians, have 3 or 4 drinks, and then drive home. Now, here's the thing, that's not cool, but it also is our market. It's a huge market. 1, 2, and 3 drinks combined is like 60%, 70% of people in Canada. That's a huge market. And that's who we can appeal to.
Would be that it would.
Imagine if every single person in a bar could drive to the bar and then take their car home. And as I think about this, Shawn, okay, I know I'm going on a tangent here, but here's the thing. Your market is the cost per mile without tip. Comparing Lyft and Uber has zero relevance on your thing. Because here's the thing. On average, if you could save, imagine if on every single Uber you could save like $1.50, 286 versus 234. Think about just Lyft. If I never had to tip, that's $1.50 per mile I would save going home if I could just use my car. Because I'm not tipping anybody, for example. Or a better stat would be to find out what is the actual markup on using Lyft versus just driving, because that's the money I could save, isn't it? And then plus that by convenience.
One beverage. To grow my business, my objective is to work with frontline developers to get on major platforms.
So how can this business start and how can it grow? How can people know that there is an alternative to Lyft and Uber that's different, that just involves them having their own car, not paying for parking? Questions to transition.
And start with a localized market like the city of Toronto in order to pair these drivers up. And the long-term goal, just like Uber and Lyft, would be to get on a major platform like the NASDAQ.
So I think these visuals are good, but they could have been like step 1 and then just a picture of Apple and Android. Step 1 is developing the app. The good news is the technology and infrastructure are well established because of Airbnb, because of Lyft, because of Uber. So I'm not making anything from scratch. So there's savings involved. Step 2, next slide. The next question is, where do we start? Next slide is a picture of the city of Toronto, so that you spend less time on each slide, but each one is a reveal.
Remember something, people. When you were a kid, your parents told you not to get in.
See, this is a good reveal. So what happens after we start in Toronto and we're hugely successful? How do we grow even more? Then you show this slide. Also, what is this blue background? Couldn't this have been just a picture of the NASDAQ as like big, nice one? I'm sure you can find them. And imagine if you had a little black box that said 2 years later or 2024.
With strangers, but we seem to do it all the time. These businesses have potential and they are effective. We didn't think Blockbuster would be gone 15 years ago, just like we didn't think we'd be getting in cars with strangers.
That's a great little ending. It's just no one knew how it ending. I think in general, I'm going to talk a little bit more about endings with everyone, because here's how you should have ended. So you talk about NASDAQ. And so here's what we know. We know that there are people who drink and drive, who don't want to, but still do, because they have their car parked, and that's their primary consideration. We know that there's a market for this, a huge market. We know that it's a way to compete with Uber and Lyft in a way that they can't compete with us. So the final thing you're thinking is, can I really trust a stranger to get into my car? Well, let me ask you this. 5 years ago, would you trust getting into a stranger's car? Thank you. And now I'll entertain any questions. Something like that. Oh, that was the end. So overall, Shawn, here's what I loved. I love the idea, first of all. I loved that you were trying to use simple
Right on
images.
the nose.
I love that you were trying to use simple images. That was really great. I love that you had a good market plan and you used an imagine statement and a belief statement, which was really great. And now all we have to do is refine those with a few more specifics to get to the next level. But well done. Nothing but improvements. Good job.